I'm Samuel Zwickel.
I'm Andrew Liang.
And we're roommates at Harvard.
Andrew, hurry up!
Sam, get out of here!
Right now, we don't amount to much.
So we decided to see what interesting things other pairs of friends have done since leaving Cambridge.
Turns out some Crimson editors teamed up to help a president win re-election.
Other friends run multi-billion-dollar hedge funds together.
So join us as we chat with these people who are much cooler than we are.
And this is
Crimson Connections.
We kind of met really substantively on the Crimson. He helped me kind of through my compy period. And I do remember one of the things that I came up with, which was the first housing poll. So I just loved
Yes, that's right.
the idea. So one day I said, you know, at the time, which were the popular houses was a closely guarded secret, because there was a housing selection system in which you would put down your first choice and your second choice, and they had some weird system of trying to minimize harm, but they wouldn't tell you what were the. So I said, this is no problem. I'm just going to show up at the dining halls, gather 500 surveys, and publish all the house images and the relative popularities. And we did it, and the administration went crazy. Tried to tell us not to publish it. We published it. It's the one story I've complained about. When the Crimson moved its archive, they lost that story. So it's there. And then that housing poll was repeated actually for many years after that. It became a mini institution.
Mark, why don't you do the honors and explain how Penn and Schoen was formed and our first day going up to the courthouse in 1975.
Yeah, but I would tell the story a little bit. Let's see, a little bit before that.
Okay.
I would tell them a little bit story because I was at the we were at the Crimson, right? And Doug, as I recall this whole thing, Doug had a summer job with a media consultant, David Garth, who had a potential mayoral candidate, Ed Koch, and I was known as a guy who could do polls because I had done some polls either for the Crimson or I had a summer job at NBC.
And the Horace Mann record, please.
And the Horace Mann record. I almost got kicked out of school for doing a poll on how much sex and drugs everybody did at the school, and the Board of Trustees was not very happy about that poll. So he knew I did polls, so he said, hey, I've got this thing to do a poll for this potential mayoral candidate. And we got together, we went up to what was then the inner sanctum, as I recall, drafted almost the first questionnaire we ever did, and figured out how to do a poll. And that was our first thing. And then we realized, hey, we could maybe continue to do this kind of thing. And we eventually did go to the courthouse, pay $13 and get out a partnership certificate for Penn and Schoen.
How did you convince people that these two, whiz kids from Harvard would be, their consultants? What made you guys?
In the beginning, the appeal of exactly what you described, whiz kids from Harvard with a better mousetrap, was very appealing. And I think that worked for a couple of years, 2-3 years. And then we were a business and we had to prove ourselves in the way that businesses do. But I think we had a leg up because substantively and certainly technologically because of Mark, we were ahead of the curve in an industry where we still had to persuade people, I kid you guys not, that telephone polling, rotary dial telephone polling was something that worked. People thought you had to do in-person interviews, and the idea that you could do a telephone poll at night, tabulate, and have results in the morning blew people's minds. Mark really invented the whole concept of sample precincts. And it was at a time, and I'll say this, and I say this with respect and affection, that Mark was less sophisticated about politics, but more sophisticated about polls and statistics. That we did the sample precincts in the first primary in 1977 when it was Ed Koch, Mario Cuomo, Bella Abzug, Percy Sutton, Herman Badillo, and 2 or 3 others. So it was a very difficult election to call. We did the sample precincts. We showed Koch first, narrowly, and then Cuomo. And we told the campaign after about a half hour after the polls had closed, so no results were in, that it would be Koch and Cuomo in a runoff. And nobody believed us. I can tell you, nobody believed us. And the net result was Koch came over, asked Mark what we had. Mark said, you and Cuomo in a runoff, you first, Cuomo second. Koch looked at him like, that'll be nice if that's true, but there's no way what you're saying is true. And it was completely true.
I knew everything about polls and computers.
Yep, that's true.
And so I tell Doug, you know, I can get that. We were using the Harvard Computer Center and it took a day or two to get turnaround on the polls. I said, I could go buy a computer for $2,000 and build it and put it together. And Doug looked at me like, what am I going to do with a computer?
Right, exactly. Who needs computers? They exist in data centers and nobody has a personal computer. And why would we waste all that money?
So I bought the computer, built it, programmed it in an assembler by reading a book on it, and charged Doug $75 a month for my buying the computer, which of course gave us overnight polling because we were able to turn it around instantly in that era.
At a time, Mark, to be fair, nobody could do polls in under a week to 10 days. So we were doing polls in one day or one night that others took a week to 10 days.
Yeah, I'll say that Whiz Kids from Harvard was a little bit of our moniker, but what really got us going was that Ed Koch won.
Yeah, that's true.
And to start out with a surprise upset win, the original strategy, and I'll credit Doug with the original kind of more new Democrat strategy. Koch was coming off being the most liberal member of Congress. That really turned out to be the key to that campaign. So then that led to, oddly enough, people in Venezuela read about the Koch win. And David Garth, the media consultant, called our competitor, Peter Hart, who was the biggest pollster at the time, and said, would you go? And he says, I'm not going to Venezuela. So then he called us and I said, sure, I didn't even have a passport. I'll get my passport and be down there and set up polling from scratch. Right. In that case, they didn't have phones, so it was door to door. And that just was such an incredible experience to learn.
But I think, Mark, you've got to give yourself the credit that's due. The guy that you taught polling in Venezuela took what you taught him and brought it to the entire continent.
Yeah,
Gustavo
Mendez. Yeah.
Yeah.
But to set up and to go to places, I mean, our field team was once arrested for 25 suspicious people. We had to let them stay in jail for an extra day so they wouldn't know that we were actually working for the government. Because we were purists about the methodology. It was new. We were bringing it to developing, not just New York and Ed Koch. So in the States, what was happening is politics was going from being all about wards and people and organizations to media and message. And that's where polling fit in. And in Latin America, then the same thing was happening. And so wherever politics was moving from the ward to media and message, that was where polling and our advising was really going to make a difference. And it was incredible to help leaders really understand what people were thinking. People always look at the job of pollster and say, they just do what the polls say. No, I always say good candidates make us look good, because they know how to take the understanding of what people think and feel and incorporate it in terms of their message.
So for people watching this who aren't familiar with the type of polling you're talking about, there's polling where people go out and just poll people to find out what public sentiment is, and then there's the polling that you're talking about, right, where you're advising a leader. And so what led you to the second rather than the first?
Well, I think I wanted to be in politics, but I understood very quickly that being in politics, working in a campaign day in and day out, was not something I wanted to do. I wanted to be involved at a high level, but be able to come in and out of campaigns. And with the technological sophistication and the analytical skills that Mark brought to bear, we had a product that literally didn't exist. And unless we explained it and sold it, people didn't know there was a product out there that gave them the power to do what we were doing.
It was never about just saying 26% favor this and 36% favor this. It was about getting a model of the voter, right? The kind of model you'd find in the responsible electorate, to understand that voters are rational. What's making them tick? What is it about you that could connect better through the voters, through your message, through how you're framing the message, through your advertisements? And so that was the goal of what we were doing. And that later on would turn out to be really commercially viable, right? One day I go to Doug and say, Doug, we lose one more political race because, you go through these waves. Democrats get wiped out, Republicans, we're a much closer country than we were. We used to actually vary by a lot more. And I said, Doug, we lose one more governor's race. I don't know what we'll be doing. And I'm a little tired of flying all around Latin America. Let's try this corporations and see how it works. And we started out getting as our first corporate client really AT&T, and what AT&T was going to do about a competitor called MCI. And so we applied the political techniques to the commercial, and that just turned what we had into a real business with real careers for people.
So we have to ask you too about just the rundown and the entire story of how you came to work for Bill Clinton.
In 1994, my then wife and I had been staying in the city, and she said to me, Doug, we got to get a weekend house in the summer. Well, I hemmed and hawed, and we did. And our next door neighbor was an infamous guy by the name of Dick Morris, who became Clinton's principal advisor for a time in the '96 campaign. And Morris, even before his downfall, which was well publicized and was quite outrageous, was a notorious character. So he needed someone to front for him. And Mark alluded to the fact that I was involved in West Side politics in New York, and I was. And one of the people I knew was Dick Morris, and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee now, one Jerry Nadler. And so Morris said, Doug, I'm going to put you into the Clinton campaign. Well, it would be as if, you got a call from the editor of the New York Times saying, guys, we're going to make you managing editors tomorrow. I mean, be great if it happens, but unlikely in the first year or two out of Harvard. So sure enough, Morris called, and we did a poll, and we did it before, in late '94, before I'd even met Clinton. And so in '95, I get a page. I'm at the airport in Chicago, get a page. Morris calls and says, on the night of, February 8th or something, you, me, and Bill Clinton are getting together. And immediately I blurted out, I have something that day. He said, you'll be free. And of course, everyone's free for the president. So I was free and very quickly brought Mark in, and we developed for Clinton, and Mark should probably speak to it because it was, again, product innovations. Much of what we did for AT&T, we brought over to Clinton, but we developed at Mark's behest something called ad testing, which at the time was virtually unknown. I think it didn't exist, but we did quick polling, ad testing, and Mark became the principal strategist when Dick Morris was forced to leave the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I think Doug has it right. Dick called Doug. Doug brought me in. We would go to these secret meetings in the White House that President Clinton at the time felt that he was a prisoner in his own White House, that the staff had gone completely rogue and they had lost the midterm elections. And we came in and did some presentations, and these presentations, I think when you have an opportunity like that, we did innovate. We developed We developed basically what became Soccer Moms then. We developed the concept of kind of values-oriented talking differently from the way he was speaking. We very much, again, reoriented how you combine lifestyle polling in what we combined with regular political polling. And as Doug said, we developed mall tests so that within 48 hours, we could find out how an advertisement might do. It was an incredible system. And in the end, Dick blew up. We remained, as I'll never forget, on election night, our models called it exactly to the point. The president on Air Force One was disappointed when he told me to tell everybody how it was going to come out. And I had just calculated that Ralph Nader would get too many votes in California and that we'd come out 49 instead of 50. And I had to say 49, and I could see the disappointment in his face that it was going to be 49-41. And some of the public polls were showing by the end we were going to win by 17. It turned out to be exactly a 49-41. And so the machinery we developed turned out to be really accurate. And he kept, what we did was we had a weekly meeting with the president and the top staff to not just look at polls, but look at policy and administration strategy and issues. And we did that meeting for really 5 full years, right? For an average of 44 a year. And I turned that into, for the last 5 years, even a course at Harvard where I taught with Stephen Ansala-Baheri, American Public Opinion, drawing upon the budget shutdown, all these different experiences, the Monica Lewinsky scandal, all of these things that we polled through for President Clinton, and how polling told us what the connection was between what the public thought, what the elites thought, and how the president acted.
So for people unfamiliar with the polling process and a lot of what you guys did, like identify the soccer mom category and everything else, walk us briefly through what it was like to first, you think of a question or how the polling actually happens, what you look for when you take the polls, and how that turns into certain recommendations.
Well, what I would say is the difference between what we did beginning in the late 70s and what we continued doing and what polling was doing was we would get at real world questions, choices, issues that consumers or voters were facing. And we would ask about it in a value neutral, straightforward way. So we were getting into people's heads to figure out how they were making decisions and then what messages or inputs would impact their thinking. Now, today that's fairly conventional, but I think, Mark, you would agree that back when we started, this was really virgin territory.
Yeah, because most market research, it was a bunch of scales and a bunch of ratings. It wasn't a bunch of kind of elaborate policy oriented or choices or message questions that we did. We also, I think, had a more realistic view. It wasn't just about numbers. And I notice now that some of the data analysts get it so wrong because you have to put together your knowledge and understanding of who the public is and how they react. So, and you get so many questions. I was just so kind of infuriated the other day because everyone goes to corporations now and they quote a question that goes something like, don't you think that your corporation should do more social good? Well, I'm sorry. Don't you think people at the Harvard Crimson should do more social good? Doug, shouldn't you do? It's a
absolutely
question. Everybody would answer that. And so then they say, well, corporations should now play more of a role. It's not a real question. It's a fake question. The real question might be something like, do you think companies should emphasize more their stands on social issues or the qualities of their products? Well, that's an actual question that is a real choice between and when you ask that question, what does it turn out? Products. So much of what you hear is agenda driven, but when you're behind the scenes for the political campaign, if you're wrong, if you tell everybody that your analysis is that Susan Collins has no chance of winning, you are way off. Or as we used to say, you never want somebody whom you told that they're going to be president to wake up not president, as happened to Hillary, not on my watch. When we didn't win, we knew we weren't going to win, but we came very, very close. But in 2016, she's somebody who was told she was going to win not by us, luckily, and then work up and wasn't president. And Doug, you'll have to tell the story. You were behind Donald Trump long before there was a Donald Trump.
Yeah, I have to, I'll tell you the modern day analog of this. In 1987, maybe early 88, but late 87, early 88, Donald Trump took his first poll for president. And I'll tell the whole story here, and I'm happy if you want to play it, but it's true. So it showed that because he'd had some issues with his casinos, it was going to be hard for him to run. I think we were contemplating, I could be wrong, it was 30 odd years ago, as an independent, but it was, whatever notoriety he had, it was probably not going to be convertible into a victory in the 88 election. I was frustrated that President Trump, who was slow in paying his bills then, had not paid his bills. Now, this is pre 9/11, well pre 9/11. And I was walking by Trump Tower on a rainy Friday, and I walked in. I pressed the 26th floor, went up. There was a receptionist. And because Trump wanted to know what was going on in his own office, there was the secretary's office, and then right behind it was Trump's office. And I walked right into Trump's office, and I said, again, he was then, maybe, 6, 7 years older than Mark and I said, Donald, you got to pay your bills. And he pointed to a stack of invoices and said, you want me to pull your bill, one bill, out of this pile and pay you? I said, it only takes one. He said, okay, pulled it out, signed it, gave me the check. True story.
So presidential polling has had a lot of time to evolve since you guys were there, originating a lot of these techniques. But in the 2016 election and the 2020 election, a lot of people say, gosh, these pollsters just don't have a clue what they're doing. Their predictions are way off. What aren't people understanding? What aren't the pollsters doing right? And then how do you explain this Donald Trump phenomenon that we saw, especially in 2016?
Well, I think it's important to note that Doug, if I go back to his writings, was pretty good at seeing in 2016 that Trump might win.
Yeah, I did.
Before a lot of analysts really saw that. And I think it goes to that we always looked at these polls from both perspectives. And I think a lot of pollsters get into looking at things from one perspective, as though there's one argument, and you could see it in the questions. Like when you poll about immigration, if you just ask about kids in cages, and you don't ask about whether people want tougher immigration policy, or you don't ask about sanctuary cities, you don't get the real complexity of American public opinion. And it's only by looking at both sides. So I think Doug in particular, compared to a lot of the pollsters, really kind of focused on understanding both sides of the argument. And when you do that, you see how close or not it is. I think a lot of the models too were 5 or 6 points too democratic. They just are. The country is only 24 or 5% liberal, and it's 38% moderate and 38% conservative. And a lot of the polling models have a different country than the reality. I always used to say that when there's a difference between the research and the reality, go with the reality. Okay, and that means correcting your models. And I think in some of these states and races where they spend hundreds of millions of dollars, people at that point, they know if they're being called or polled on the internet that it's probably to get their opinion from one campaign or another. And I think that you can't, you couldn't do polling in the Soviet Union. You couldn't do polling in situations where there's not full democracy. And I think in some of these situations, it's very similar. There's such a media aura, there's such a drumbeat, so much money is being spent. Like people asked me to poll in Georgia, and I said no. And then the one thing I'll leave you with, the Harris poll, which I supervise, our last poll, 4 points, it was the single most accurate poll done this year in 2020.
So I guess finally, looking back at when you guys started at Harvard, you went through Israel, Venezuela, New York City, President Clinton, all these companies. You guys have done a lot together. And if you had to sort of talk to a member of the class of 2024, a freshman today, about what you saw on the way and what they should think about looking forward on their own careers and the decisions that they're about to make, what would you tell them? And what are some of the things that you think you wished you had known, but you probably did not?
We didn't expect anything in terms of what we would get. We weren't looking to be instant millionaires, much less billionaires, but we enjoyed a degree of success because we were willing to take risks, work hard, innovate, and ultimately achieve what I think very few, if any, were able to achieve individually or collectively.
Yeah, look, I think if you go back, Doug and I were on the verge of being corporate lawyers.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Absolutely. This close, I had an offer. I was going to be an antitrust lawyer. I had that idea for many years. And you know what? We really saw, well, we could do something that maybe will contribute to what's happening in society. And at the same time, do something unique, a little different. I suppose if it didn't work out, we would have gone back to our law firms. And I think that people who are kind of faced with what to do when they're coming out of Harvard, it's like, okay, now it's, should I go with a management consulting firm? I mean, what are you really going to do, right? So we invented our career at the time, right? And so you have to just be willing, I think, to not be laser focused on how much money you're going to make. Get laser focused on doing something you really enjoy, that you can be passionate about, and that will make a difference. And let all these other things follow that. And I think that's what we just did. We rolled with it.
And I think that's a very good message. We achieved a level of professional, personal, and financial success that I don't think either of us anticipated. I certainly didn't. But it's because we wanted to succeed in a way that reflected really, I think, the best possible values, and it worked. And I would say to freshmen, follow your dreams, work hard, explore, take risks, and don't settle for anything other than pursuing that which makes you happy and gives you a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment.
Well, Doug, Mark, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you this evening.